Today, friends, we are going to be talking about the best builds for New World in Season 2. And as we did with our previous video for the best builds in Season 1, we are going to be covering specifically the Holy Trinity within New World of Tank, Healer, and DPS. Now, just as we also did with our Season 1 video, we are just going to be focusing on PvE. But if you guys are interested in some PvP builds, let me know in the comments down below. If we see enough requests, I'll happily make a PvP builds video for you guys as well. Now, one note that I do want to drop for this video before we really get started is there is no one size fits all in terms of your gear, your weapons, your armor, your jewelry. There is really no one size fits all for New World. Depending on the activity that you're going to be doing, you will be using different gear. Now, we will elaborate on this towards the end of the video, but to start things off, let's give ourselves the focus right now that we are looking to do the Tempest Heart Expedition. And specifically, we want to start jumping into Mutated Tempest Heart, pushing our way up to difficulty 10, or maybe even starting at difficulty 10. I don't know, depending on where you guys are on your journey, it's going to vary, but the rules should apply the same. Now, to preface this, Tempest Heart is a corrupted expedition. How do I know it's a corrupted expedition? It doesn't actually tell you, so I guess you would have to just kind of learn it by going in. But one resource that you guys can use to determine what sort of enemy types you're going to be facing within a certain expedition is New World Database. Now, I'll pop a link to this website in the description down below, but under the creatures section within the database, you can sort by expedition. So if we go to Tempest Heart, we can see that all of the enemies in Tempest Heart are corrupted. The other mutated expedition that's available this week is Garden of Genesis. If we take a look at Garden of Genesis, it's all Angry Earth. And that is going to have a heavy impact on how your gearing is going to work. As you can see with our tank setup here, and this is going to be the same for the healer and DPS as well, we have Corrupted Ward everywhere. So Corrupted Ward, Corrupted Ward, Corrupted Ward. Corrupted Ward is a perk that allows you to take less damage when the corrupted enemies hit you. And as a result, taking less damage just means you're going to die less often, which means the run's going to be smoother. Now, this is the point where people get a little bit discouraged because they're like, so if I want to do Tempest Heart, I need the Corrupted Ward. If I want to do Garden of Genesis, I need the Angry Earth Ward. And if you want to do Lazarus, you need the Ancient Ward. And if you want to do Barnacles, you need the Lost Ward. Yes, there is sadly quite a lot of gearing to be done, but my recommendation would be to focus on your Corrupted Ward first and Ancient Ward second, as those are the most important ward perks and do actually cover a lot of dungeons. Corrupted Ward in particular gets you covered for Tempest Heart. It also works in Dynasty Shipyard, it also works in the Depths, and it also partially works in the Ennead as well. So Corrupted Ward does have like multiple different dungeons where it's going to be useful for. The other question that I commonly see when we're talking about this is, do I really need Ward Baggins? Is it needed? The answer is no, not really. I would say the same, that if you were told me you're going for an expedition into the jungle, do you really need to bring some clean drinking water, a knife, maybe some way to start a fire? No, you don't need to, but it will increase your chances of survival probably quite significantly. So I would recommend that you do make the effort to go get it. Now, for those of you wanting to learn more about how to acquire ward gear, let me know in the comments down below. And again, if there's enough of a discussion on that one, I'll happily make a video on where to get Corrupted Ward, Ancient Ward, Angry Earth Ward, where to get yourself set up with these sets of ward gear so you can really jump into the end game journey of New World. Final bit of information that we have to put at the beginning of this video is the gems in the armor. Now, because again, we have focused on Tempest Heart and specifically Mutated Tempest Heart, right now it is a nature mutation. So you can see Overgrown here, enemies leave a zone upon death, healing enemies that stand in it. Then we got Toxic, it spawns a poison entity that does nature damage over time. We got Frenzied down here, when you dodge, you take nature damage. So a lot of this is all based around nature damage right now. And as a result, we are focusing on taking less nature damage by putting specific gems in our armor that give us nature damage absorption. Now, these are called Cut Pristine Amber. So again, in order to give ourselves the best chance of success, we are heavily speccing against nature damage because that is going to be the predominant damage that we will take in a nature mutation. This is not specific to Tempest Heart. This is just because it is a nature mutation. So we have a Cut Pristine Amber in pretty much all of our gear other than this ring because I was too lazy to switch this out. And we also have an amulet that gives nature protection as well. And this is also going to be something that you will see with the healer set that we will showcase and also with our DPS set. Again, this is because we're specifically targeting Tempest Heart, which is corrupted, and the mutation, which is nature right now. But if we were going to go for Garden of Genesis, we would be looking at Angry Earth Ward because we covered it as Angry Earth Ward enemies. and instead it is fire damage that we've got here. So we would be looking to put rubies into our armor instead to reduce incoming fire damage. Now, just like with the ward gear, do you need to put the gems in your armor? No, you can do it without the gems, but the same metaphor that or whatever you can call it, the same explanation is the same, that it increases your chances of success. And often when you sign up to a pug run, if you can find a group, they will often ask you to link gear to them. And they're looking to see specific gems in your gear. They'll ask you to link good gear. You know, this is very common that you'll see. And if they see that you don't have the right gems, or you don't have the right ward, or you don't have Bane in your weapons, which is another point that we didn't cover, you often won't be able to get in. So unless you're going to make your own groups, this is part of New World's sort of gear treadmill that you will have to walk. Right, that was a lot to absorb. Hopefully we haven't scared you away from this video. But with that being said, let's actually jump into our tank build now and talk about the pieces of gear that I have to make this work. Now, this, of course, you can tweak things as you want to go. If you're just looking for some general overall builds, again, you can take the examples from here and move things around as you want. Use different gems. Maybe you just want to do some open world stuff and you need a little bit of build inspiration. This is what I think is the best individual tank build right now that will fit across multiple different dungeons, but obviously you will need to change your ward and Bane and gems out depending on which expedition you're going into and the mutation that is involved. So this tank build involves using sword and shield. It is a tower shield and a one-handed sword, and then we have Warhammer. It's also full heavy armor to get that nice damage mitigation. The weapon mastery that I've opted to go for involves getting leadership on the sword. Now, if you're feeling a little bit less confident, you could go for defensive formation. I think this is also fine. If you were going to do that, you'd probably just take a few passive points out of here, put them over on the right side, probably pick up restoration, pick up invigorating bulwark, defensive training, any other passives that seem good. Shield rush and defender's resolve are non-negotiable in my opinion. Defender's resolve is your AoE taunt. It's one of the best taunts in the game. It gives you damage reduction and it taunts enemies for 8 seconds in an 8-meter range, which is really, really good. The way that you're usually going to find yourself doing this is you go into a pack of enemies, and then once you get within position, you just bash the shield. Now, there is like sometimes you want to hold on to this, as you obviously do have access to some taunts on your Warhammer as well, but I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to just start off with the Defender's Resolve. One thing you do have to be aware of is when you weapon swap away, you will lose the benefit that Defender's Resolve gives you. So if you're gonna pop Defender's Resolve, make sure that you're not planning to switch to your other weapon first. So if you want to use some Warhammer abilities, maybe open up with the Warhammer abilities and then switch over to the sword and use your Defender's Resolve so you don't lose the bonus on the weapon swap. Shield Rush is here because it provides a weaken, an AoE weaken, which is pretty good. Weaken is a damage reduction, and also it becomes incredibly good when you get the Fortifying Shield Rush perk, which again, we'll go over the armor soon, but this perk just makes the ability incredibly good. It gives you a Fortify, which increases your armor, and I believe, if I remember rightly, this does apply to multiple enemies that you hit. So if you can hit like multiple enemies with Fortifying Shield Rush, you can proc multiple instances of Fortifying Shield Rush and get an insane amount of armor, just making you very hard to take down, and it lasts for 6 seconds. Very, very good buff. The final ability here that I've opted to go for is Leaping Strike. This is just because it gives you a little bit of movement. If there is an archer in the back that is like hitting your healer, or you need to dodge out of the way or something, Leaping Strike is just a good movement option. It also does provide a slow, but most of the time this isn't going to come in handy in PvE. But again, Leaping Strike just there to sort of get out of danger or engage on an enemy very quickly. But you could switch this out to Shield Bash if you need another taunt. Look for Whirling Blade for some more AoE DPS, or even Reverse Stab. I think it's got a little bit of cooldown reduction, but generally not as good as it was back in the day. Looking at our Warhammer build, I highly recommend that you do take Shockwave, as it is it's your taunt basically. It also has Sundering Shockwave, which is a perk that you definitely want to make sure you have on your Warhammer. It increases the damage the enemies take by reducing their armor with Rend. Wrecking Ball I think is great for CC. It also provides a little bit of AoE Fortify, so some damage reduction for your team. And then Clear Out again has a little bit of AoE Fortify as well. So you just got some sort of nice supportive kind of damage reducing and damage increasing abilities here, and opting to go for Aftershock here just because, you know, Justice for All isn't really going to do anything unless you're taking Mighty Gavel, of course. If you want to swap something out for Path of Destiny, it's fine to go for. My recommendation would be to not switch out Shockwave though. And the passives, again, there's nothing that I think is absolutely mandatory in here, but these are the passives that I would recommend you guys go for. One thing you might be confused about with Clear Out, because I was confused about it as first, is like, Baggins, usually you want to get all the enemies clumped up and then DPS them down, so if you clear out, aren't you going to knock everything back and upset your DPS players because they want things clumped up to do damage? Turns out clear out in a mutated expedition format doesn't actually knock enemies back, it just knocks them down. As a result, this becomes a very good tool for interrupting certain attacks and enemies, so yeah, using clear out to interrupt an enemy and then using Wrecking Ball and Shockwave for the stun. You have multiple different forms of CC, and if you catch an enemy using an ability that is interruptible, using one of your Warhammer abilities to sort of counter it can be very effective, and I think that's the sign of what makes a really good tank in PvE, is learning the enemy patterns and then using a CC ability to sort of counter it effectively. Now, jumping into the stats, my recommendation is to go up to 200 Constitution and then your remaining points into Strength and Dexterity. Why do you want to get Dexterity, you might ask? Because Warhammer just scales with Strength. Well, most of your damage, if not all of your damage, is going to be coming from the Sword and Shield. This is what you're going to be spending the vast majority of your time attacking with, and typically the Warhammer is just there to sort of drop abilities and then switch back to the Sword and Shield and, you know, just keep on doing your stuff. So because the Sword and Shield is going to make up the majority of your damage, you can actually put points into Strength, and then there's a sort of area where you get to what is known as diminishing returns, where putting points into Dexterity actually nets you more damage. Now, in order to really maximize your attributes, you want to make sure you're using some sort of attribute food. My recommendation is Carrot Cake. It's quite cheap right now, but it is going up in price due to some changes in Season 2. But this gives you Strength and Constitution, and with that in mind, we can now drop ourselves down to 200 Constitution, and then we could probably look to go to, let's see, I think we would go to 100 Dexterity. Maybe, I don't know, I think it's going to play with what you kind of like. You could go to 250 Strength and then 50 Dexterity. You could go to, I think this would probably net you the most damage here, and then the remaining points into Strength. But really, it's kind of up to you what you want to go for here. I would recommend at least 200 Strength, though, because you do get the damage on stun, slowed, or rooted enemies, which is going to come in pretty often with your Warhammer. And the Constitution is another question. People sometimes like to go to 300 Constitution in order to get shoved around less often. However, 200 Constitution just frees you up with a lot more points to put them into Strength and Dexterity. What you might find often if you go to 300 Constitution is you're simply not doing enough damage to hold the attention of the enemy. So this is, again, going to come down to an individual basis and a preference, but generally I go to 200 Constitution to make sure that I can do enough damage to hold the attention of the enemy, because once taunts wear off, the only thing that's going to keep the enemy attention on you is actually just raw damage, and the damage, of course, is modified by carnelian gems in your weapons. But again, more DPS means the enemy dies faster, and it means the run is cleaner, so you can play with the attributes as you feel comfortable. 200 Constitution is my recommendation for this tank build, though. Finally, we're going to go over the gear that I have equipped for this build. We have Guardian's Resolve, which is a very nice sword for dealing with corrupted enemies. It gives you Corrupted Bane, Refreshing Move, and Thwarting Strikes. Now, Thwarting Strikes isn't going to be active too often. If you do go to 300 Con, it is always on, which you could say kind of maybe makes up for the damage. I don't think it quite does, but Corrupted Bane and Refreshing Move is what we really want. Now, this weapon is actually a pretty easy drop to farm. Guardian's Resolve drops from Rafik of Bishara, which is located in Brimstone Sands, and this is an enemy you can solo multiple times until you get him to drop it, so definitely one that I recommend for would-be tanks. Go out and get this one. Again, this is New World Database, and I'll link this in the description down below if you guys want to look it up for yourself and maybe look up some other weapons that meet certain criteria you're looking for. To reiterate, the non-negotiable perks on here are Corrupted Bane, because more damage equals the enemy dies faster. It also equals you doing more threat and holding the enemy's attention. And then Refreshing Move means every single time that you land an attack, you're getting some cooldown reduction, so your taunt is available more often, your shield rush is available more often. It's just gonna, you know, make things a lot smoother. So Refreshing Move must have on the sword, and Bane generally going to be one that you really want to aim for as well. Of course, the gem here is the Carnelian Gem. That's because it activates taunts. Without the Carnelian Gem, you're not really going to be doing a great job of tanking. Moving over to the Warhammer, we covered this briefly, but Sundering Shockwave is a really like must-have perk on the well, you can go for it on your armor, but it has a reduced effect on your armor, and there's not really that many other perks that are great on the Warhammer. So Sundering Shockwave, I think, is something you want to aim for, and then Corrupted Bane just to do more damage, so you're more likely to hold aggro. And again, we've got the Carnelian Gem there in the Warhammer to make sure that we hold attention and activate our taunts. Looking at the armor that I have in my tank build here, we have the Tempestuous gear. Now, we've gone over this many times in the past, but the Tempestuous gear is gained from a quest chain that begins up in the top of Merkgard here. So there is a NPC called Mara Rosa, and she has like a 6-part quest chain. Generally just involves going into Tempest Heart, and it gives you a bunch of great gear called the Tempestuous gear. And this stuff always has Corrupted Ward, Refreshing Evasion, Elemental Aversion. And there's a heavy strength version, there's a light focus version, there's a light intelligence version, there's a medium dexterity version. So yeah, there's a little bit of something for everybody, and I recommend you go do that chain. Elemental Aversion and Corrupted Ward are really just like the match made in heaven. Elemental Aversion is going to help you take less damage from the mutated side of the dungeon, and then Corrupted Ward just straight for the damage reduction. Refreshing Evasion sadly doesn't do too much, as you typically don't want to be dodging that often as a tank. Usually you want to be using your stamina to block. The chest piece we have here comes from Ennead, if I'm not mistaken, the Ennead Expedition just over here. And this chest piece has Corrupted Ward, Sturdy Energy, and Refreshing Ward. Sturdy Energy is a very nice perk to pick up for a tank. If you drop below a certain amount of stamina from blocking too much or dodging too much, then you get increased stamina regenerate, which is going to be great for your survivability. And then Refreshing Ward, when you're not blocking, you will be lowering your cooldowns. So you are going to be obviously getting hit quite a lot, and Refreshing Ward will come invaluable as a result of that, and it lowers your cooldowns every 4th time you get hit. And it does stack with multiple different pieces of gear that have Refreshing Ward. However, it seems like you only have it on one piece of armor in this setup. The gloves, just like the helmet, Tempestuous set here. My legs have accelerated resolve on them. It says after triggering a defender's resolve, which is our taunt, we increase our movement speed by 19%, which isn't, it's okay. And we get incoming healing buff of 7.7%. So just a little bit extra healing. You don't have to have this perk, but it is nice to pick up if you can get it. And of course, the Corrupted Ward's there again. And then finally, the boots, another piece of the Tempestuous set here. If you were looking for something a little bit cheaper or a little bit more attainable just to pick up off the trading post, I would just go for Corrupted Ward and Refreshing, or Corrupted Ward and Refreshing Ward. Even Corrupted Ward Vigor or Corrupted Ward Invigorated, those would not be too bad as well. On the chest, if you can go for it, Sturdy Energy is pretty nice. Looking at my shield, I have Fortifying Shield Rush. We talked about this during the Weapon Mastery breakdown, but this makes Shield Rush such a great ability, and I think it is a must-have on the shield. And then ideally picking up another Corrupted Ward on the shield, and Sturdy is probably the 3rd perk of choice if you can get it. Moving over to the Amulet here, Health is a must-have perk that you always want to have, and this is going to be the same on every class, just having extra health is great. And then because it is a nature mutation in Tempest, we've gone for Nature Protection. Simon's Hacksilver Ring drops from Mutated Starstone Barrows, which isn't currently available right now, but that's in Ennead, and it's a great one that you want to try and go farm when you can. It has Hearty, Slash Damage, and Leeching. An alternative for this would just be to get Hearty and Slash Damage. Slash Damage is going to increase the damage that your sword does, so the enemy dies faster and you hold aggro more often. And then Leeching is a great 3rd perk if you can pick it up for a little bit of sustain. Finally, our earring here is a Molten Earring, which does drop from the Empyrean Forge. The notable perks on here, or the must-have perks, are Refreshing Toast and Despised. Purifying Toast is nice to pick up. You could also look for Regenerating as well, or Refreshing Ward would also work well, but you want to make sure that you've got Despised for the extra threat generation, and Refreshing Toast just so you can drink potions more often. Some other common questions that I got is, do you need Hated on your sword? Why do we not have Hated? If we want to hold aggro, should we get Hated? In my opinion, it doesn't actually do too much. There is a perk that you can get that gives you extra threat. Maybe you could swap Thwarting Strikes out for it, but one way that you can hold threat more common and more frequently is just by doing damage. So I'd really just focus on the damage aspect as a way to generate more threat rather than trying to go for Hated. But if you do find that it works for you, then you can go for Hated, but I would not give up Bane or Refreshing move for it. Lastly, let's talk about our Heart Rune, our consumables here. The Heart Rune of choice that I go for when I'm tanking is the Stalwart Heart Rune of Stoneform. You can get the blue version of this from Lazarus Instrumentality, that's what it's called. The final boss of Lazarus drops the blue version, and then in order to upgrade your Heart Runes, because this is sometimes another question that comes up, you have to go to a stone cutting table. I'm in Brimstone Strands right now, and the stone cutting table is just over in the top here. So if you have it in your bag and you go to the stone cutting table, you should see the option to upgrade it somewhere in here. Yeah, there it is. We have to make it to the purple version, and then when you have the purple version in your bag, you can make it into one of the legendary versions. And in my opinion, the Stalwart version of this Heart Rune, which gives you Mending Form, is the best because it's just extra healing. It means you're less likely to die, and it also procs, like it gets increased healing when you're standing in sacred ground, which is something that you want to be doing as a tank. Consumables for my tank build involve infused health potions, infused regen potions, which I think should just make sense. We also go for corrupted ward potions to reduce our incoming damage, and then I have gemstone dust here, which doesn't really see a whole lot of use, but you can smash up uncut gems Is it at the stonecutter? It might be at the armory, or you could just buy it off the trading post. And this gives you specifically elemental damage absorption, which can be useful in certain situations. We talked about the attribute food, but something you can also look to pop is a honing stone for extra weapon damage, and then of course you want to put your infused corrupted coating for Tempest Heart. I don't think no, we do have infused corrupted coating. You want to make sure you apply these to both weapons, as they don't apply, like, you know, it's the weapon that's drawn that applies the coating. The last important consumable that you could go for is Desert Sunrise. This reduces the duration of damage over time effects by 17.5% for 40 minutes, so it's just, again, a little bit of a damage reduction. Okay, that covers the tank section of this guide. Now we're going to move on to healer. So the healer's weapons of choice, and you're going to be going with this almost all the time, is going to be the Life Staff. It's the only healing weapon in the game, and then Void Gauntlet, which is kind of like the healer's best secondary. In terms of Life Staff mastery, I often like to go for Sacred Ground, Orb of Protection, and Beacon. We just go for an all AoE healing build. You'll find typically that most expeditions you go into are very melee heavy, so there's going to be a lot of melee players, not much fire staff, not much bow or musket, just like spears, great swords, great axes. And as a result, everybody's going to be clumped up on top of each other because all the melee players are going to be hitting the same boss or most enemies at the same time. So taking heals that allow you to clump up on top of the enemy like so, or on top of your friendlies and the enemies, just makes sense. In terms of heal rotation, usually you want to be firing out Orb of Protection or Sacred Ground first. You want to do Sacred Ground because it increases the incoming healing of all other healing effects by 50%. Orb can also be juicy though because it gives you a 20% fortify now for 10 seconds. So it decreases like incoming damage by increasing your teammates' armor. And if you have the mending protection effect on your weapons or on your armor, then it increases the extra healing so they receive even more healing. So opening up with Orb or Sacred Ground is recommended in most fights, and then you want to plop Beacon down after that just for some additional extra healing. Some people like to ask, why do I not go for Divine Blessing? And that's simply just because we don't have enough points. The way you would have to break it down, you'd have to take 1 point out of Radiant's Blessing and 1 point out of Protector's Touch in order to get Divine Blessing, and I simply don't think it's worth giving these up. But if you want to, that is a preference that you could try and do. Some other builds that you could potentially go for is dropping Beacon in favor of Splash of Light, or you could even drop Beacon in favor of Divine Embrace. But personally, this is my recommended healing build. One thing that's nice about this healing build that healers might enjoy as well is you can take off targeted healing. Some people really don't like targeted healing. They find it very uncomfortable to get used to it. So if I can actually find where the heck it is in this menu, yeah, there we go. And then you can just freely place your heals wherever you want without worrying about them locking on. However, if you do want to play with targeted healing, and I think it is good to get used to it, especially when it comes to learning the keybinds. By the way, my keybinds, I use buttons on the side of my mouse to target party members, although it is a little bit broken right now. When you target somebody with like a Sacred Ground, for example, you can press middle mouse button and that will unlock the heal to place it where you want, which I think is a little bit of healer wisdom that maybe will help some of you trying to make use of targeted healing, but also wanting to freely place some heals sometime. Now looking at the Void Gauntlet Mastery, this is a bit of a strange one. You guys might notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 abilities, but only 3 hot slots. This has been a recent change that I've been making to my rotation, which kind of has helped a little bit when it is a nature mutation in particular. Now, let's go over this real quick. Oblivion is something that you're going to be running pretty much all of the time because it's an extra damage boost to your teammates. And it also applies Withering Oblivion, which means that when you attack enemies that are in Oblivion, you weaken them so they do less damage, which is like in a roundabout way, some sort of like, you can think about it as healing. Void Blade is something you're going to be using pretty often as you get more confident as a healer because it allows you to get in the thick of it. So typically you put your heals down on top of your DPS players who are fighting the mobs, and then you yourself get in there with the Oblivion and the Void Blade and just start swinging. As a result of hitting the enemies over and over again, you will trigger the Void Caller passive, which gives you additional extra healing, and then you can also get some self-healing as well. When you crit, you heal yourself, and then there's other perks that are going to allow you to heal yourself with Void Blade as well. However, if you're not feeling very confident and you just simply want to stay at range, you could just slop in this Essence Rupture. So if we switch that out there, you could try this build, or you could also go for Orb of Decay for some additional healing as well. The reason why we have this ability over here, Petrifying Scream, is specifically because of the nature mutation. So if we take a look at the nature mutation, there are various effects in here, also Indomitable, which is saying that the enemies are going to be healing themselves. So enemies heal for 20 to 40% of the damage done, and then Overgrown, Compost, enemies leave a zone upon death, healing enemies that stand in it for 3% health per second. So the enemies do actually do quite a bit of healing, but you as the healer, as well as providing healing to your teammates, you can also reduce the enemy healing through the use of Scream on your Void Gauntlet, and that is because there is a specific perk which is called Putrefying Scream, and it says Petrifying Scream inflicts disease on hit, reducing target's healing by 29% for 8 seconds. Now, if you put this perk on your weapon, it becomes even more potent, It's kind of up to you guys whether you want to do that or not. But again, specifically for nature mutations, because the enemies do get a lot of healing from the nature mutation affix, Putrefying Scream becomes almost like a non-negotiable ability that you will have to run and perk on your armor correspondingly. Now going over to our weapon mastery here, there are a few options that you can go for. Again, we're going to start with our attribute food just to give us a little bit more to play with. Lately, I've been running this venison tenderloin with blueberry glaze, which gives us focus and intelligence. Now, you guys might be wondering, why do we want intelligence as a healer? The things that we scale off of are focus, right? There's the Void Gauntlet and there's the Life Staff, both in focus. Life Staff is not intelligence. Does it give us extra healing, Baggins? No, it doesn't. But what you'll often find is when you get to around 250 points into focus, your heals are actually pretty damn good, especially with most like players that you're running with these days. They are kind of squishy, and that if they're gonna die, they're typically just gonna die in one hit anyway. So as long as you have, you've got your Sacred Orb and Beacon down, 250 focus is generally gonna cut it. I will say though that this is a build that if you want to go with the Void Blade, that's where intelligence comes in. If you're not using Void Blade on the Void Gauntlet, then you can, forego getting some intelligence, and instead you could use a different food, something like a smoked rib cap with cabbage and barley soup, which is constitution focus, or the other way around, focus and constitution. So for a beginner healer, just focus on focus and constitution. For the more advanced healers and those wanting to get in the thick of it, you start putting points into intelligence. Typically, I've been going to, I don't know, somewhere between 100 to 150 intelligence, depends how confident I'm feeling, and this is usually what my build is looking like. 100 constitution is always the minimum that I go for personally, unless I'm feeling really, really spicy, because it gives us a nice little bit, if we lose aggro, or the tank loses aggro and we get attacked, 100 constitution often keeps me from dying in like one hit. But if you want to go wild, you can drop down to 50 constitution and then put some points into focus or intelligence. There are some healers out there that like to go to 200 intelligence to really hit hard with the Void Gauntlet. And then again, you want to be looking at usually around 250 plus focus to make sure that heals are actually kind of popping. So we've covered the weapon mastery and the attributes. Now let's go over the actual gear, the consumables, all of the stuff in this screen that I'm going to be using for my healer build. So starting off with the Void Gauntlet, we have Corrupted Bane for the bonus damage. Again, if you're going in with Void Blade, you want to have Corrupted Bane. If you're not going in with Void Blade, you don't need to worry about this. The same with Refreshing Move as well. So for those of you wanting to get in the enemy's face, if we do the switcheroo here, then the Refreshing Move and Corrupted Bane is going to come in pretty clutch, because Refreshing Move, every time you land an attack, is going to lower your cooldowns. And it also synergizes as well, because Oblivion, you want to be up close to the enemy and your melee DPS players to give them the buff, and Scream also to apply the healing debuff as well. So Void Blade just goes nice, with that sort of melee playstyle that it becomes. One other thing that we didn't cover actually is why Essence Rupture here. So the bosses don't actually, I know this is going to get a little bit confusing, but the bosses generally don't get affected by the mutation that much. So it's only enemies that have vampiric above their or below their name tag that actually get this effect. And again, it's only enemies that have compost like above or below. When they have the compost affix attached to them, when they have the vampiric affix attached to them. So it's not all enemies in the dungeon don't have all of these effects. It's only the enemies that have the labels underneath them, if that makes sense. And the bosses never get these labels on them. So the only thing that's really going to be coming in on the boss is the frenzied thing down here, the third mutation. So as a result, what I'm basically trying to say is the bosses aren't going to be doing any healing. So Scream doesn't really do anything on the bosses. So that's where we switch Scream over to Essence Rupture instead. Essence Rupture is a nice one because it just puts a debuff on the enemy. That means when your teammates hit them, they get 20% lifesteal effectively, which is pretty good. 20% lifesteal, not too bad. So you're using Scream throughout the majority of the dungeon against all the trash mobs, and then you switch over to Essence Rupture if you can get out of combat just before you fight bosses. Right, going back to the gear because we got a little bit waylaid there. Corrupted Bane, Refreshing Move for the Void Blade. If you're not going with these, then just honestly like a Blessed and a Refreshing Rupture Void Gauntlet would be pretty solid. On the Life Staff, I like to go for Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Mending Protection. I think in the future there is going to be a Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Fortifying Sacred Ground Life Staff that we'll probably go for, but right now this has been pretty juicy. This particular Life Staff, or these perks, you can get from the Empyrean Forge. There's a Life Staff in here that's called Cleric's Walking Staff, and the Cleric's Walking Staff, as you can see here, has Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Mending Protection. So basically the same thing as what we have here on the left. When it comes to gems in my weapons, I like to go for a diamond in my Life Staff. You can go for a Rune Glass Diamond if you want. It's not really necessary. It's just a little bit of extra DPS, and you actually don't lose healing, even though it says you would, because it's 12% damage versus 15. For whatever reason, there's a bug, and it isn't the case, so it's just like extra extra damage on top with no downside. When it comes to the Void Gauntlet, again, if you're going for the Void Blade, you can run an Arcane gem, and that is because the Corrupted are weak to Arcane, and we'll cover that at the end of the video. Or you can just go for a Diamond, again, for extra healing and extra damage while you're at full HP. Moving over to the armor, it should come as no surprise, but we've got Corrupted Ward and the Nature gems in here because it is the specific mutation of Corrupted and Nature damage absorption for the Nature mutation. Putrefying Scream, as we covered, is a great one to have when it's a Nature mutation to reduce healing. The other perks I like to go for are Voracious Blade, just to get some extra sort of self-sustain with the Void Blade. We've got the Tempestuous Glove, just as we did with the tank set. This is a great set of gear, some awesome perks in here for reducing the damage you take and getting a little bit of cooldown reduction. And then the other perks of choice that I like to get on my armor are Keen Beacon and Fortifying Sacred Ground. But again, maybe in the future I'm going to be switching this over to Mending Protection and getting Fortifying Sacred Ground on my Life Staff when the Life Staff is finally available in the game after the Siege of Sulfur event drops. Lastly, looking at the jewelry and then the consumables heart rune here, the jewelry I've gone for is Health, Nature Protection, and Constitution. This is going to be the same amulet across all builds because it's just, you know, it's what we need. Health is a great perk on the amulet. In fact, it's a must-have. And then the Nature Protection there for the Nature mutation. We have Hearty Sacred and Infected just to make the Scream last a little bit longer, but Hearty Sacred is really the only perks that you need on your ring most of the time. And then the earring here has Refreshing Toast and Beloved. Beloved can also be another perk which is called Evasive, if I'm not mistaken. But basically you want to reduce your threat so you don't get hit by the enemies as often. You're less likely to pull aggro from the tank with either Evasive or Beloved. Which one you go for comes down to personal preference, but Beloved is the one that's generally preferred amongst most healers. Looking at our heart rune, I've opted to go for the Bile Bomb heart rune, which you get from Starstone Barrows. And then I've upgraded it to the version that is basically similar to Essence Rupture, where it says players who hit the afflicted target get a 20% lifesteal, basically. So the Bile Bomb is another way to reduce healing, which is going to be great for the Nature mutation, and then we got a little bit of extra like healing to our team here as well, so just a great support option. But like with the tank build, you could also just go for a Stone Form. It's solid, you know, if you pull aggro, then it's going to keep you alive, so Stone Form great, but Bile Bomb for a little bit extra healing reduction on a Nature mutation. Lastly, the consumables, it's probably no surprise, but we have Health Potion, Mana Potion, Regen Potion, and then I'm also using Corrupted Ward Potions. If we pull aggro, or if I think I messed up and I'm going to get hit by the boss, then this can sometimes save you. It's 15% damage absorption. The other consumables I like to go for are a Honing Stone, just to do some extra damage. It doesn't increase our healing. I also used Energizing Hearty Meal for a mana regen effect. Desert Sunrise for some reduced incoming damage. If I'm feeling spicy, we'll also pop a Corrupted Coating to try and do some extra damage to kill enemies faster and complete the dungeon faster. You can pop these on either the Void Gauntlet or the Life Staff, or both of them if you want. And then lastly, the food can come down to whatever you need the stats in. So this one for Focus Intelligence. If it's just Focus and Constitution we need, we use this one. And then there's the other way around with this one as well. One thing that I forgot to mention when it comes to healing is you are always going to be in a light equip load, by the way. Medium healer or heavy healer is not going to work. You want to be in a light armor equip load, and as a result, that means wearing predominantly light armor, but you can get away with a medium chest just for a little bit of extra armor, or you could do some medium legs, and then anything else can be medium other than your chest. So once again, that's light, medium, light, 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 or you could go for medium legs, and then it could be medium boots, medium gloves, or medium helmet. Light chest though, so I recommend light, medium, light, 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 because you get that 30% healing bonus, and that is basically mandatory for a healer. Okay, now we are going to move on to DPS, and our best build for the DPS option of Season 2 when it comes to PvE is a Spear and Great Axe. Now, this can vary a little bit with the specific goal of Tempest Heart here. We've opted to go for the Great Axe and the Spear because I think it's particularly good, but it's not uncommon to see Spear and Greatsword be a thing as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the build, if that makes sense. But let's just go over what I'm specifically running here and what it does and why I would recommend it to you guys. So on the Spear, the abilities of choice that I have gone for are Skewer, Perforate, and Leg Sweep, and then we've opted to pick up the Exploited Weakness Ultimate here. A lot of the passives on the right side of the tree are pretty good, and a lot of the passives on the left side of the tree, not so great. They typically involve doing heavy attacks, which you usually don't want to do. When it comes to the Spear, just the old jab and stab is going to be the way to go. Some of these abilities, well, actually, it's just going to be Sweep. I think Sweep could be negotiated, or actually maybe Perforate. One ability that you're always going to be running is Skewer, and the reason behind this is because, like with our tank and healer setup, there is an ability called called Enfeebling Skewer, and it says skewer hits apply weaken, reducing target's damage by 44% for 8 seconds. It's a 44% damage reduction, which is bonkers. It's really, really strong. So apply that to the boss, and the boss is almost doing like half less damage than it would normally do. So Enfeebling Skewer is like a must-have perk, and because the perk is so much more powerful on the weapon, I recommend you always get it on the weapon. This is going to be something that I'm always looking for when a spear user or a DPS user signs up to my groups. I want to see that spear, and I want to see a spear with Enfeebling Skewer and then the relevant bane for the dungeon that we're going into. As I mentioned, you could swap out Sweep or Perforate for Cyclone. Cyclone's actually seen a pretty big buff in Season 2 with some good AoE DPS, but it's not as great when it comes to single target like on bosses. But if you want to, you could rock Cyclone. I like to go for Perforate because it makes the target take more damage with the rend. It's also got a little bit of a stagger on it. Actually, I think they removed the stagger, but it's more weaken actually. That's it. Yeah, it's more weaken. And then the Sweep is great for actually knocking down the enemies. The knockdown can interrupt several abilities in the game, which can be pretty good. Just like with the Warhammer, you can actually save your team sometimes by stopping a particular cast of an enemy going off. But again, if you wanted to, you could switch it out for Cyclone. Just generally not recommending Vault Kick or Javelin these days, as they're a little bit more niche and harder to pull off. Moving over to the Great Axe, just like the Warhammer and Sword and Shield combo for the tank, the Great Axe is basically going to be your secondary weapon that you're switching to use abilities, and then you're switching back to the spear. Now, the reason behind this is because the spear does thrust damage, and thrust damage is extra effective against the Corrupted. We'll go over this at the end of the video because I think it'll probably be better to, give some additional information at the end rather than, piecemealing it in between. But as a result of the spear being our primary weapon, we're just looking for like utility from the Great Axe, and some of the utility that Great Axe really does well is clumping up enemies. So you have Maelstrom, which pulls enemies into you, like so. You also have Gravity Well, which you can use again to clump up enemies, pull them all into one area, and then you can even occasionally use a Reap to pull like an archer or an individual enemy into the pack. And the reason why you want to clump things up is because it's just then your attacks can hit everything. The tank can hit everything with the shockwave. The healer can hit everything with their Void Blade, with their Scream. You are responsible for like getting the enemies nice and clumped up so everybody can do damage to everything at the same time. And the axe is just great at doing that. So all of the abilities that we focus on with the Great Axe here are involved in clumping the enemies. But if you maybe wanted to switch out Reap for some movement with Charge, you could possibly look to do it, but I think you might get some strange looks from your team if you're running Charge, as this is like the commonly accepted sort of Great Axe setup these days in the meta. And Bloodlust just immediately activates, whereas it takes a little bit longer for Mauler's Fury to come online because it's only per attack. And like I say, the spear is going to be our main weapon with this setup. One of the last thing to mention with the Great Axe, and while we're talking about the weapon mastery, is another perk. Just like with the Skewer here, which reduces enemies' damage, you also have Enfeebling Maelstrom as well. And it says targets hit with Maelstrom a weekend, reducing their damage by 25% for 8 seconds. So you can significantly reduce the damage the enemy does just by popping the Skewer onto the enemy and then popping the Maelstrom as well. So even on bosses where you can't really clump them up or move them around because they're like CC immune, basically, you can still reduce their damage by a major amount and be very valuable asset to your team as a result. So let's now go into the attributes, and as we did with the tank and healer, we are going to pop an appropriate food. The food that I'm going to be using this time is called Fall Harvest Turkey, which increases our dexterity and strength. But again, you could use Carrot Cake, as we did with the tank setup, for some strength and constitution, or you could also go for some dexterity constitution as well. And that is because the 3 stats that we're going to be using in our DPS role are constitution, dexterity, and strength. Now, you guys might have identified the Great Axe does not scale with anything other than strength, so maybe strength should be the focus, and you would be right. But again, we're saying that our main in-hand weapon is going to be the spear, and the spear scales with dexterity first, strength secondary. And because of the diminishing returns, as we talked about with Sword and Shield, you want to be kind of splitting them evenly so you can get, some decent damage with the Great Axe, but also benefits some good damage with the spear as well. Now, the points in Constitution do come down to personal preference. It is pretty common to see 50 or even 5 con DPS out there. However, it just really depends how confident you are. Because I'm a little bit of a potato, I'm still usually going around 100 Constitution in my DPS builds, but it is not uncommon to see people ask you to go 50 or even 5 Constitution. But we'll lock it in 100 for the purpose of this build because we're going to play it safe. And then we're pretty much going to evenly split our points up here in order to get the most out of both weapons' DPS and avoid too much of the diminishing returns, whereas you put more points into a particular stat, you get less back in return. Because dexterity is the main stat here, we are going going to opt to go for 215 though, just put the additional points into there. And that's how I am doing my stats for this build. But again, if you wanted to free up a bit more, you could take 50 more points out of Constitution, or even 100 points out of Constitution, and just spread them equally between Strength and Dexterity. So that has covered the attributes and weapon mastery for the build. Now we're going to look at the particular weapons. So this should make sense, but we have the Corrupted Bane and the Enfeebling Maelstrom. We talked about how the Enfeeble skills are really good for reducing damage and kind of playing almost like a support role with your DPS. I have opted to go for a Diamond in my Life Staff, and this is because most of the time, this is going to be our in-hand main weapon. We're going to be attacking with this most of the time. And if the healer is doing it right, you want to see that the Sacred Ground, Orb, and Beacon are all placed on top of all of your melee players, typically with your tank as well. So you're going to be standing in AoE heals, and you're actually going to be at full health a good chunk of the time. So this is giving you 15% extra damage. We've opted to go for the Opal in the Great Axe because this is more of like a, I don't know, like a utility option, as we said. So you can just dodge roll and then make sure that you activate the Opal. You could also put an Opal in your spear if you want to find yourself dodging more often. But again, diamonds or opals, I think it is interchangeable, but I would recommend that you go for the diamond in your main weapon and then opal in your secondary, but you could also just go for diamond here as well. But basically, more damage while your stamina is not full, or more damage while you're at full health. Both of these should be fairly easy goals to achieve, provided you're standing in heals or that you're pressing dodge occasionally. Moving over to the armor, it's Corrupted Ward across the board, of course, to reduce damage from the Corrupted. A juicy perk that you really want to get when it comes to Great Axe is an Insatiable Gravity Well. You heal for damage done on the Gravity Well, which is nice, but this really good part is on hit, you cast another burst that deals 50% weapon damage. So you basically do like a double Gravity Well, which is pretty awesome. Just gives you a nice bit of damage boost, so this is like a good one to go for if you're running Gravity Well. The chest piece, as we mentioned with both our tank and healer setup, is the Tempestuous chest, which you can get from that quest chain, and it's pretty nice. It's got some great perks on there. Of course, the gem choice is going to be the same as with the other setups because we're looking at that Tempest Nature mutation. I've opted to go for Bleeding Sweep on my gloves. These like randomly rolled as legendary when I craft them when we got Empowering Breaker, which isn't really that good of a perk. I think if we could choose third perks on the armor, probably just be like Refreshing or Refreshing Evasion or something for some extra cooldown reduction, but Empowering Breaker sometimes comes in handy. My legs here have Corrupted Ward, Physical Aversion, Refreshing Evasion. Ideally, this would be Elemental Aversion, but the Tempestuous stuff is all medium for the setup here, and we do want to be in a light equip load as our DPS to just get the extra damage bonus. Base damage plus 20% when you're in light. It's only base damage plus 10% when you're in medium, and you don't get any bonus damage in heavy. So yeah, just more damage, and also the dodge roll is pretty handy. So we are going for a light equip load, and as a result, we want to have light, medium, light, 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 and I can't use medium legs, which would be great if we had the Tempestuous set, but like I say, we can't. Lastly, looking at my boots, I've got Corrupted Ward and Fortifying Perforate. I think Fortifying Perforate is a great pickup if you're going to be using Spear as your main weapon. It gives you Fortify for every hit of Perforate, so you get 5.8 times 3 for 6 seconds. Perforate's great for the Weaken and the Rend to reduce the damage the enemy does and increase the damage the enemy takes, as we previously mentioned. And then it also has a further bonus with Fortifying Perforate, making you a little bit tankier, so a great pickup here if you are going to be using the Spear as a main weapon. Lastly, we'll take a look at the jewelry here. We've got the same perks across like all my build here with the amulet. This is a nice one-size-fits-all, health, nature protection, and then again, I guess we should probably address like a third perk here if you could get it. Stamina recovery would be a great one that fits like one-size-fits-all for extra stamina. Maybe empowered or fortified, also like kind of nice options in the third slot as well. Looking at my ring, we have the Heart of Aviva. I believe this drops in Brimstone Sands. I'll just quickly double check this. Yeah, just took a look here on New World Database. This does come from chests in the Brimstone Sands region, so this is a good one to pick up as it gives you leeching for a little bit extra sustain, thrust damage for more damage on the spear, and then bloodletting, which is going to activate on both Bleeding Sweep, and it also activates on Skewer, which has a bleed as well, so a little bit extra DPS there. One thing to note, we don't actually have Hearty on this ring, and that is because we have 150 dexterity, which still gives us access to 3 dodge rolls anyway. Like Hearty or 150 dexterity are kind of interchangeable, because this means dodges cost 10 less stamina, but you could also get Hearty on top of this if you wanted to. I think the most important perk to have here is the thrust damage, and then probably followed by leeching or Hearty, and then bloodletting is kind of optional, to be honest. Lastly, taking a look at the earring, we have Refreshing Toast, Refreshing Evasion, and Beloved. The most important perks here are just going to be Beloved and Refreshing Toast. Beloved, so you don't pull aggros often, even if you're doing huge DPS. You're going to be generating less threats, so less likely you'll pull attention off of the tank. Refreshing Toast to use potions more often. And then this could be Refreshing Evasion or regenerating. The third perk is kind of up to you, but that's what we've got on this Dynasty's Earring here, which funny enough, I believe drops from Dynasty Shipyard. Lastly, going over the consumables, I like to run Detonate. Detonate is arcane damage. When it explodes, it's arcane, and the Corrupted are especially weak to arcane. We'll cover that at the end of the video, as we previously mentioned, but basically your heart rune can be anything that your team needs. If you just want to go for raw damage, Detonate's great. You could also do a little bit of extra damage with Firestorm. You could help out the healer and or like the team with the Bowel Bomb for the healing reduction. You could even go Stone Form so you don't die as often. Lastly, going over the consumables, we have Health Potion, Regen Potion. It should make sense why we have these here, just extra healing. I've got the Ward Potion in case we pull aggro or we're in a particularly heavy boss damage phase. This can reduce your damage from corrupted enemies. And then we have the Gemstone Dust, just in case there's like something that's specifically elemental damage. Other consumables I use are Powerful Honing Stones for extra damage, and then we use the relevant coating on both of my weapons, so make sure you have the weapon out, apply the coating, switch weapon, and then apply the coating. And then we use the stat food of choice, which could be carrot cake, it could be fall harvest turkey, it could be rabbit stew. It kind of just whatever stats you need it to be. And then we can also use the desert sunrise to reduce the duration of damage over time effects, just to make us, you know, not die as often. So that concludes the best builds of Season 2. Now, as we mentioned throughout the video, I'm going to post a couple of resources down below, which might help you guys out with some additional information. The first resource that we're going to take a quick look at here is this handy dandy guide from the M11 guys. So they have a breakdown on here of different damage types that you take from different enemies. So the bosses per individual dungeon actually do a specific damage type that is sort of on top of the mutation. So whenever you go into the depths, for example, and you fight Captain Thorpe, even if you had the depths as a void mutation, Captain Thorpe is always doing slash damage. The bosses don't really care about the mutation that much, so you can look to take a particular amulet which are damage absorption types for the particular boss. I know this is probably like for some people. I think if you're just jumping into dungeons and like getting started and wanted to do a few mutations, you don't need to go this specific. But again, you might find that some groups do require you to have a specific type of amulet for the final boss, if the final boss is deemed sufficiently challenging enough. The other resource I want to share with you guys is this breakdown of enemies and which particular damage types they're weak to. So the Angry Earth are weak to fire and slashing, which should make sense. Trees, you can slash them with an axe or a sword. You can also set fire to them and they take bonus damage. And then it gives you a breakdown of which dungeons these enemies can be found in. So the Angry Earth are in Genesis and Barnacles, Ancients are in Lazarus, Starstone, Ennead, Corrupted. You guys get the idea, and then it tells you which sort of weapons do more damage in that particular dungeon. So you can use this to sort of chop and change your build as you see fit. But you can see with Corrupted, because we focused on Tempest Heart in this video, the Corrupted take bonus damage from Arcane, which is why we talked about using Arcane gems in our Void Gauntlet. They also take bonus damage from Thrust, which is why we said that the Spear is pretty good, but they don't take any bonus damage from Slashing, so that's why we weren't really going all in with the Great Axe on our DPS build. The final resource is New World Database. We covered this in the video, but you can sort by expedition to see which enemy types you're going up against, and then you can get an idea of what sort of ward and bane you need if you want to focus on a particular expedition. Hopefully you guys found this video useful. I know there is a lot to go over here. I wanted to add a little bit of extra to talk about Garden of Genesis and how the build would change, but I've been recording like nearly an hour now. Hopefully Jack's gonna be able to edit this down into a nice consumable video. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to drop in on the stream. We are streaming New World almost every single day. It's twitch.tv/BagginsTV. Again, we'll have a link to that in the description down below with everything else. If you got any other further comments as well, let me know in the comments down below. Any other pieces of advice for other players. One thing that I do want to preface at the end of this video, and if you made it this far, you're awesome, because I know it was quite a lot to digest, but Ward and Bane and this whole concept of Ward and Bane is going to be going out of the game before the end of the year. Amazon have confirmed that they are removing Ward and Bane at some point in the future. My suspicion is it will happen with the expansion, which is Season 3, and Season 3 arrives in 85 days and 9 hours, which I believe is the 6th of October. So it's worth bearing that in mind, you know, before you go through all of these hurdles to get all of the different sets of gear. Maybe just focus on the Corrupted set like we did in this video, do the Corrupted dungeons occasionally, and then wait for the Warden Bane gear to get removed, because it's a lot of work to get all these different setups, you know. Doing this tank healer DPS setup, I had to change all the gems over. It actually cost me quite a bit of gold. And then you can imagine if I wanted to go do Angry Earth, I'd need to change everything to Angry Earth Warden, Angry Earth Bane, and then we'd also need to change the gems to Fire Gems as well. And we didn't even really cover it, but there's also trophies you can put down to do bonus damage against certain enemy types. If you really want to go like min-max, you can, you know, put your Angry Earth trophies down and then switch them over to Corrupted trophies for when you're fighting the Corrupted, and I've putting these wildlife trophies down for beasts. Yeah, it just keeps going, you know. It's a rabbit hole in New World when it comes to gearing, but hopefully this video provided you know, some insight into what makes a build tick in New World and why we're doing certain things with certain builds. That being said, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure, as always, you go ahead, click the like button, jump into the stream if you got any further questions, or you just want to see some New World in action. Click subscribe if you want to stay up to date with more videos as they come out, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video.